Hello to everybody at home, and thank you for tuning in to help us celebrate the last week of National Poetry Month. I'm Nicole, the manager at Read It Again Bookstore in Swanee, Georgia, and I'm joined by poets Tiana Nobile and Arhm Choi Wild. Tiana's new book, Cleave, just came out April 6th, and Autumn's came out the same day a year ago. Both of their books are available at our store, or you can get them online through the links in the comments, but they are very pretty books, as you can see on all of our shelves. The way the formatting is going to work tonight, each poet will read for 15 minutes, followed by a discussion on craft. Viewers, feel free to make comments or ask questions throughout, and we'll respond to them at the end of the readings. Because this is virtual and we can't see your faces, the only way we know you're watching is if you say something. Our first poet tonight will be Autumn. Autumn is a queer Korean-American poet who grew up in the slam community of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Their debut book of poems, Cut to Bloom, was the winner of the 2019 Write Bloody Prize. Autumn is a Kundiman Fellow with an MFA in Poetry from Sarah Lawrence College, and their work appears in Barrow Street, the Massachusetts Review, Pleiades, Split This Rock, and other publications. They work as the director of the Progressive Teaching Institute and as a diversity coordinator at a school in New York City. For more information, visit their website at autumnchoiwild.com. All right, you're up.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm so excited to be reading with Tiana. Her book arrived in the mail a couple of days ago, and I've just been completely immersed. So I'm super excited to be sharing this virtual stage with her tonight. So I'm going to start off with a poem that really a lot of the themes that I also found in Tiana's, which is such a cool experience. And this poem is about what it means to be taught our histories, but from a purely Western perspective that doesn't include the perspective of Korean or Korean Americans, and the journey of filling in the blank. There's a couple of notes that I'll read out loud before jumping into the poem. And as a content warning, violence and sexual assault comes up in this poem, so please do what you need to take care of yourselves. The Forgotten War. 1. The Korean War is often referred to as the Forgotten War because of its absence from US public attention. 2. Japan colonized Korea for 35 years before the Korean War, forcing everyone to take on Japanese names and speak only in Japanese. Secretary Taft sanctioned this occupation as long as Japan agreed the US could continue to control the Philippines. 3. Hundreds of thousands of women were forced into sexual servitude by the Japanese military until the end of World War II. American military personnel continued to visit the comfort stations until they were closed in 1946. The Forgotten War. 1. My grandfather was a soldier in a war where only white men could be heroes and my people, the herd, to be saved. 3 million Korean civilians killed, pocketed like coins for democracy, which is to say he was born to forget who pulled the trigger. 2. Grandmother never talks about her childhood and hoards everything. Cabinets of ketchup and Spam, reused toilet paper drying on the sink's edge, teaching us to pick up each grain of rice, eyeing the outskirts of her plates, never talking about the Korean pried out like teeth, born to forget the name her mother called her, foraging instead for words like hunger and please. 3. What is a plea? In the language of men collecting 500,000 comfort women, many only 12, most dying from multiple STDs. What does a person deserve after years of days like that? Surely more than the dollar, the few hundred out of thousands of comfort women to remain received as reparations. 4. The word Han in Korean means to celebrate your survival in silence, knowing you weren't the only one to pay the price. Means seeing there was less than a grain of rice and still setting the table. Means that when they steal your shovel, use your hands and plant the garden anyways. 5. It took my aunt years to divorce her abusive husband, choosing a bruised neck over an empty mouth. She now works at a 7-Eleven, borrows money from my mom for her daughter's wedding, tries to still her voice into a frozen lake when she calls. Her choice to leave her husband, the same as leaving the church, single mothers being outcast in Korea, which is to say, being a woman is the loneliest thing if you're trying to survive. 6. My mother, in trying to survive, made us speak English at home, knowing we wouldn't be able to defend the family in our mother tongue. She says the word Han is my birthright, something every Korean owns. But who am I to define this prized ruin, this fertile ash, far from fluent, saying thank you like a foreigner, craving to fit into the language of home and memory, split from the homeland we wouldn't have survived, queer and single-mothered, split from holding each other's words in our mouths like our own, missing what was never ours. Yet I am this fool, coming to praise, if not love, the fracture, knowing it has allowed us to choose, if not forget. And my mother can be more than a survivor. And I can be more than a child who was trained to never ask for more. It's so fascinating how great our imaginations have gotten at imagining an audience, because I have no idea if you're there. Hi. But I do love how we can still stay connected during this time. So reading Tiana's book, it resonated so much with me, the way she was talking about a longing for a closeness with her mother, and also a fear of what that closeness could mean. Does that closeness mean I would be, more susceptible to inheriting the violence she suffered? Would I have to give something up for that closeness? So this poem's kind of about that. It's called Legend. Like a good Korean woman, you take whatever is past, a cup of rain, an empty fist, a story without a mouth. But every truth has something that makes you believe in a lie. Every mother has a gift she never meant to give. Is it true grandfather left you on your aunt's porch one winter, holding a small note instructing you to wait? 2 weeks became 2 months, 2 years, a decade. I was 21 the first time you told me this, one bright morning with sparrows tossing in the air. Remember how you stopped halfway, started cooking as if this hunger could be filled? Is it true you watched him walk away? Is it true that when he picked you up 10 years later, you walked back into his arms, not the girl he left, but a woman with tough hands? Is it true that learning how to feed yourself what the men have failed to provide is a gift you wish you never had to give? There's such a transformation that happens when you see part of your story reflected in someone else's. And it was so cool to see that in Tiana's book. And, that's why representation matters so much. This book is about, I lived in Asheville, North Carolina for about 6 years. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say. It's called What It Takes to Call a Place Your Own. In North Carolina, the trunks of cherry trees grow extra wide. I lounge on branches and pull the blooms to my face in the peak of spring. The dirt in Asheville glitters in the sun, mica inside every piece, in gutters, on porches, even in my hand when I shove fistfuls into my mouth, wanting to think I too am made of blue mountains that make the sky shine. At the restaurants, I gnaw my barbecue ribs like everyone else, people gawking, surprised to see me this far south. A veteran in the street says he killed my people in the Korean War, like this is something to share over drinks. But even now, hundreds of miles away in New York City, I dream of hemlocks leading me back to the river's edge, where I let her see what I hide inside my pockets. If only none of this mattered, I could follow my partner back south, instead of staying here where there's no square of earth to call my own. But I can call it home without being asked how I learned to speak English so well. Whew, I'm reading all these poems about my Asian identity. I can't help but think about the rise in anti-Asian violence and all the people suffering from that right now. And if you're wondering what can you do about it, I really suggest looking to your spheres of influence. Whose ears do you have? Who can you help connect the dots between this last year and the way that language has led to violence? And how can you tie it to larger patterns of white supremacy and systemic oppression? I think so much about who we can influence. And if you're wondering what you can do, that's something I often go to. Okay, this poem is called Story of My Name, after Maria Luisa Arroyo. 1. Arma, Ara Amma calls. I'm talking to my partner on Mama's couch, telling her the same things I've been saying all of my life. Korean doesn't have an R sound. It's more like an RDL all smushed together, not a roll like in Spanish. I see this woman I love mimicking the sounds of it, her lips turning the corner of the page, almost. Rice is luck in Korean, and autumn means lots of it. It also means big hug, as in the armful of flowers that hides my face, and 2, an adjective meaning beautiful. 예쁘다, 아름답다. 2. My parents had just moved to Detroit and couldn't make English work for them quite yet. Hours before I was born, they asked doctors how to spell my name, honoring their suggestion letter by letter, bowing low before the true Americans even then. 3. There is a market in Korea's corner of Manhattan that is also called Aram. Sometimes I walk by without a grocery list to see myself outside, the crude answer of my body. But I don't want to explain this to every person I meet, so I let English conquer my tongue, say, hi, my name is Autumn. And people will say, your name is beautiful, thinking of trees not afraid of biting their own apple foliage. 4. In Korean, autumn is 가을, which does not hold the time I fell on the steps of the Jefferson Memorial or the first time I bit someone else's lip. I catch myself wishing people wouldn't try to say it right, like Arham or Arhm, and let me deny my parents' immigrant ignorance and the culture that lets me be luck and hug and beautiful. Autumn is how I make reservations for tables and doctors. Autumn gives me a mask like everyone else. So why am I falling more in love with the woman listening so intently to the way my mother commands my name? I must convince her. It's okay if she doesn't say it right, but I must admit, I'm so happy when she does. Okay, where am I at? I'm 10 minutes in. Cool. I'm going to read 2 more poems for y'all. This next one is after a poem by Jean Ann Ruley, who, if you don't know, incredible poet who I would highly recommend. Unsolicited advice for the queer Asian girls just trying to make it. When your mother forces you out of the car, let her. When she tries to apologize years later for doing so, let her. When you're old enough to understand how mistakes can be well-intentioned, answer the phone. When she calls your girlfriend your roommate, plan on inviting her back for the next holiday. When she asks if the man you went to lunch with is your boyfriend, simply say no. When you want to let your anger swallow anybody close or small enough, remember that change takes a long time. When she ignores your fiance when making introductions, remember how at least she asks about her when she calls. When at your wedding she sees you're both loved and belong, don't remind her of everything she's done before. When she finally tells your wife she loves her, let yourself cry. All the longing built from 10 years of waiting, let her see your tears and try to forgive her and yourself for letting it take this long. So I'm gonna close out this set with a new poem. Y'all, what a year, huh? So yeah, I mean, I read what I loved seeing in Tiana's book too, just like this, the desire for closeness with parents and motherhood, and I've been thinking a lot about translation and how I'm so uncomfortable in Korean that I refuse to speak it often. I don't feel like I can name myself in Korean, but that comes at the price of my mom knowing me. So this poem is kind of about that. Only thing you need to know is that I didn't have a sense of smell until about 3 years ago. So this poem references that. It's called The Right Word. I was 18 the first time I got a tattoo, following this one law as if it was a straight line, and I didn't mind the ruler. When my mother finally saw the inked leaf on my ankle, she said nothing and walked into the kitchen, which is to say, what could I expect raising children in America? Or the counter needs to be wiped again, or good thing my mother can't see us now. The counselor calls to say I'm a season away from dropping out. My mother's forehead to the mouthpiece, and she's saying, I understand, which is to say, a backhand needs no words, or I never wanted this, or I am a bowl held together by a seam. I traveled to Korea for 6 months to learn her language. All I come back with is a word for that week in spring when the petals rain down and pillow the sidewalks in pink. The purple dusk right when the tree branches turn black, the name of my uncle's cousin's son, and I say, Mom, I missed you. Which is to say, I'm not brave enough to say this in a language I can't hide in, or I've missed you my whole life, or let's forget everything. The lonely Christmas tree, the pale cutting board, the phone flying through the air. The first summer I could smell, after 27 years of not. I sit on a back porch, darker than my mother likes me from the sun, dizzy with the rupture of peach, my friend running between the porch and kitchen with my favorite sweater, raspberries, a cap, a cinnamon. My mother calls in the middle of this, and I say, Mom, it smells so good. By which I mean this peach is like a summer body unafraid of its want, or I'm watching the darkness fall to its knees, or remember that one time we laughed together just like this. And she says, I'm happy for you. Good job. Which is to say, the sky here is a bird's blue. Or do you know the Korean word for wish? Or what I would give to be next to you, smelling something for which you will never find a name. Thank you all.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. You can definitely hear the slam influences. It's a very, lots of cadence. I love it. And there was a little tiny dog cameo in the background too. That was fun. But yeah, fantastic. Next, we're moving on to Tiana Nobile, who is the author of Cleave, just published through Hub City Press in 2021. She is a Korean-American adoptee, a Kundiman Fellow, and a recipient of a Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award. A finalist of the National Poetry Series and Kundiman Poetry Prize, her writing has appeared in Poetry Northwest, The New Republic, Guernica, and the Texas Review, among others. She lives in New Orleans, Louisiana. For more, visit her website, www.tiananobile.com. All right, Tiana, you're up.
Hi, hello. Thank you to Read It Again Books for hosting, and to Autumn for reading with me tonight. Our books came out the same exact day, a year apart, so it feels like kismet for us to be finally reading together. I reread Cut to Bloom this weekend and was also struck by just how many common threads I noticed between our books. So I'm super looking forward to our conversation later. I'm going to start with a poem called Child's Pre-Flight Report. So like was mentioned, I was born in South Korea and adopted when I was 6 months old. And through the process of writing my book, I mined my adoption file for information about where I came from and how I got here. And later I ended up using some of these documents in my poems in an attempt to take ownership over this story and insert my own voice, which is markedly absent from all of these records. So this poem is borrowing language from a form called Child's Pre-Flight Report. Name in full, Moon Young-shin. Date of birth, October 22nd, 1987. Name of escort, unknown. Case number, 87C-2411. Date of departure, April 2nd, 1988. Destination, unknown. Feeding/eating. She cries with hunger, but knows the bottle. Sleeping habit. When lying on her side, she wraps her arms around her body. She wakes easily to rustling leaves, rain thrumming on roof tiles, and morning birds greeting the dawn. Toilet training. She moves bowels in good form once to twice a day. Speaking ability. She will learn quickly when to bite her tongue. For years, she will hold it tightly, teeth clenched. In her mouth, the bitter taste of a broken bloodline. Developmental condition. She tends to play well even alone, but cries if it's boring. Placed on stomach, she lifts her head about 90 degrees, but gets irritated when it's beyond her ability. Physical condition. 6.6 kilograms, 60 centimeters at 5 months. Her skin is strong, but prone to scarring. Character. She is rather composed and mild. Legal status. So actually on the form, there's a section that says legal status and it's left blank. And I learned later that adoptees or orphans in Korea aren't citizens. There's not a natural born citizenship law like there is in the United States. So when I arrived in the United States, I was also a resident alien and didn't get citizenship until I was 3 or 4 years old. So there was a period of time in my early childhood where I was literally a citizen of nowhere. So several of the poems in Cleave are in conversation with the social psychologist Harry Harlow, who some of you might know, but who is famous for his studies on attachment and relationships between caregivers and infants. He did this work primarily with rhesus monkeys, most famously taking them away from their mothers and presenting them with 2 surrogate options, one made of cloth and one of wire. So I'm going to read a few poems that appear scattered throughout the first section of the book that imagine different forms of mother. It starts with an epigraph from Harlow's seminal research paper called The Nature of Love. Quote, "The surrogate was made from a block of wood, covered with sponge rubber and sheathed in tanned cotton terry cloth. A light bulb beneath her radiated heat. The result was a mother, soft, warm, and tender. A mother with infinite patience, a mother available 24 hours a day, a mother that never scolded her infant and never struck or bit her baby in anger." Unquote. Mother of ghost. Whether of wire or terry cloth, there will always be mother. Mine was made of ghost. Every move is one step away from her. I try to backtrack, lose myself in maps. I tell myself, tread nimbly. Every step is a newborn shadow, bodies fracturing light. Mother without a face. Looks in the mirror. I wonder what creases we share. I wonder how long her hair is. I wonder if she chews on the inside of her mouth until the skin is chafed pulp, if she sucks her teeth when it rains. I wonder if she clings to heat like a monkey to cloth. My nose capsizes. an upside down question mark. I pull and pull, the line stretched short. Foster mother. The first time I belonged to a woman, my body a fresh bulb broken off at the root. She kept me for 6 months, watched spit bubble from my pursed lips. I wonder if she ever claimed me, if she rocked me to sleep on her chest, if she wiped my mouth gently saying, "There you go, there you are." Dreams of motherhood. Wire barbed with fragments of love, or tender cloth that never scolds, never strikes, never bites. The mothers I find like copper coins, heads face up. The ones I collect because of their tenderness, the nature of a light, radiating heat. Monkey in the cage, pulling out her hair, waiting for someone to claim her. What is the opposite of mother? So I think both Autumn's book and mine delve into complex feelings about mothers and relationships between mothers and their children. The next poem I'm going to read was part of my process of understanding these various iterations of mother. And one tool that I used was the dictionary. So I have a series of dictionary poems throughout the book where I borrow language from the Oxford English Dictionary words on entries on various words. So this poem is called Mother. We tend to our roles like we tend to a fire, poking the coals with the blazing tip of an iron. The head of a woman occasionally produces more heads. The body of a woman is the source of all our breaths. See also the naming of riverbanks. See also nature's tendency to cleave. There is a difference between the qualities we inherit and the qualities of instinct. The brain with its many folds looks like it's squeezing itself. Its mouths are puckered and waiting to be unlocked with a kiss. An organ of the body is regarded as a source of nourishment for the next corresponding organ. How we feed on each other for ourselves. How we keep ourselves alive through each other. You are the living tissue beneath the bark of a cork oak. You are a ship grained with the grooves of trees. Another connective link I noticed between Autumn's book and mine is ideas around silence and language, and poetry kind of as a method of challenging this kind of inherited silence. So the next poem I want to read gets its title from an article that appeared in The Guardian in 2014. There was a study that researched whether or not people can retain memory of languages that they hear in utero, even if they don't actively speak or know the language post-birth. So they discovered that we can, in fact, store these memories unconsciously in the brain. And as an adoptee, even though I don't actively speak Korean, to know that there's somewhere in the deep recesses of my brain that still recognize it, I think is both fascinating and incredibly sad. This poem, like I said, borrows its title from this study. Lost first languages leave permanent mark on the brain, new study reveals. To experience the world muffled through the wall of skin is like wearing earmuffs while deep sea diving. Cacophony of whale song and sunken earthquakes, tonal pitches seep in. How do I translate the sound of my mother's moaning? It's a soft wail I hang on the wall of my windpipe. They say the circulatory system is the first to develop in an embryo, that the body generates cells to divide and multiply, to form a swelling ball, that your blood weaved and whirled to become my blood. Who was the first you told? At week 11, fingernails begin to appear. I bet you didn't know that nails are made of dead blood cells, how something could grow inside you that's both alive and dead. Once I learned how to talk, I did not stop. I drew blood and licked my teeth with language, English spilling down my chin. Later, I learned how words can wound without touching, and I tucked myself in a bed of silence. Let's see, I'll read 2 or 3 more. This one's a short one. So, as an Asian American person, a frequent microaggression and question that we face is, where are you really from? And this question is problematic because, right, it reinforces this idea of Asian people as inherently foreign and never quite belonging. However, at the same time, as an adoptee, it's also a question that I personally really grappled with most of my life. So this poem is a play on this question. Where are you really from? Intercourse, Pennsylvania. Fertile, Iowa. Uncertain, Texas. Hazard, Nebraska. Accident, Maryland. Why, Arizona. Hell, Michigan. Disappointment, Kentucky. Embarrass, Minnesota. Truth or consequences, New Mexico. Nameless, Tennessee. No name, Colorado. Nada, Texas. Nothing, Arizona. I'll read another one of my dictionary poems. I think as an adoptee who was raised in a white family, assimilation was the modus operandi. And this idea of the fact that I was an immigrant and I was born in another country and then arrived in the United States later was something that I felt very uncomfortable with for most of my childhood and adolescence. I think through the process of writing this book, this is something that I really started to become more comfortable with and identifying as. So this poem is borrowing language from the dictionary entry on the word migrant, and it's written in solidarity with all immigrants across the diaspora. Migrant. Of an animal, especially a bird. A wandering species whom no seas nor places limit. A seed who survives despite the depths of hard winter. The ripple of a herring steering her band from icy seas to warmer strands. To find the usual watering places, despite the gauze of death that shrouds our eyes, is a breathtaking feat. Do you ever wonder why we felt like happy birds, brushing our feathers on the tips of leaves? How we lifted our toes from one sandbank and landed, fingertips first on another? Why we clutched the dumb and tiny creatures of flower and blade and sod between our budding fists? From an origin of buried seeds emerge these many-banded dagger wings. We of the sky, the dirt, and the sea, we the 7-league booters and the little by littlers, we transmigrated souls will prevail. We will carry ourselves into the realms of light. I'm going to read one more. I'm actually going to end with the first poem in my book. So when I came to the United States, I arrived with a Korean name, and it was a name that I didn't understand, or I didn't know where it came from, who gave it to me. And again, it was something that I think has taken me a really long time to form a healthy relationship with. So this poem was kind of a way for me to recognize this name not just as a relic of a past life, but as something that's actively informing who I am today. Moon Young-shin. Written on the white slip at the bottom of a Polaroid, cut off by the frame, a name. Many years passed before I learned surnames come first in Korea. I rode my bicycle in circles around this reversal. For years, my skin leaped from shadow to shadow. I drank the darkness, or the darkness drank me, but what's the difference when your veins are full of haunting? One day I will walk the narrow streets of many cities full of ice freshly frozen. I will hike through forests of windstorms newly risen. I will learn and forget the names of many trees, of tea leaves plucked too early in the season. I will orbit the earth like a moon, searching for its shadow. Where does a moon find its planet? Or is it the other way around? To be a recently hatched egg moon, curved shell pinned to the sky. I've spent my whole life in orbit of other people's light, celestial satellite in ceaseless wane. How much can you learn from a stranger's surname? A young animal crawls its way out of the womb, stretches its legs, and feels cold for the very first time. Thank you.
That's so good. I loved reading your book and the way that your work is in conversation with so many things. I learned a lot while reading it, and even more, I think, listening to you read. So that was fantastic. And you have so many powerful lines and images, like the puckered brain and like how something can grow in you that's both alive and dead. They're just great. Thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
And there are a lot of through lines between both of your works, so I think this will be a really interesting discussion, and we can open it up to audience questions as well. So if anybody has anything they'd like to ask, just post in the comments and we'll address it. Meanwhile, would one of you like to start with a question for the other?
Okay. Arhm, you're muted.
Oh no, Arhm, you're muted.
Hi. I was so excited about this part. I was like, wow, I get to ask you. Amazing. Okay, cool. So I really want to ask you, so this book is so much about reclaiming definitions and identities. What redefinition of yourself did you end up with after finishing the book? And did writing it change the way you saw yourself at all?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, like, you know, as an adoptee, there's so much about my origin that is just so mysterious to me. And then, like, I think for most of my childhood and adolescence and early adulthood, I saw that as this like void that was really like preventing me from fully, or whether or not that was like conscious. I think I felt it like it was a void that caused a lot of angst, and was preventing me from really like fully embracing my whole self. And I think the process of writing this book helped me start to define a lot of these things for myself. Like Nicole, kind of what you mentioned, like diving into a definition or a word or a phrase or a name and thinking like, this is what I used to think about it. What do I think about it now? And maybe I'm still processing what it means to me in the poem itself. But then by the end, there can be some kind of closure. So I think a lot of it was just like personal myth making and like kind of unraveling, and seeing that kind of empty space less as a void and more as an opportunity to plant something new. So I think it was really hard work, but also I think ultimately it was super healing. Yeah, that's a great question. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think especially as, a Korean person who feels like it's just recently starting to explore Korean culture and history. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about Han and how that informs your poetics.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because while in the process of researching what it meant, I got so many different perspectives on Han. Some people were talking about how, there's some theories about how it's actually something that the Japanese occupation convinced Korean people of, like, oh, it is within your DNA, it is within your culture of resilience to survive, to go through hard things as a way to like justify their continued colonization. and the hardship that created. So I think that's really fascinating. But on the other side of that, I mean, to be of a people where survival is within their DNA, I do find power from that. I think it's tragic and sad in a lot of ways. I'm thinking, about your poem. Oh, wait, I put the line in the chat that I love. How do I translate the sound of my mom moaning? But about like how you're hearing and learning things even though you're in the womb. I'm fascinated by this idea of like what we inherit, what is within our choice and what isn't. And of course, then there's a choice of what do we carry on and what do we stop carrying on. But there's something gratifying to me that in my DNA, I know something of survival. Because, I mean, I think my queerness and having a single mom, I often feel distant from my Korean heritage in a lot of ways, as well as my inability to speak like beyond a third grade Korean. And I like that it connects me somehow to our history. And it's like something ineffable, right? Like I can never really put a finger on it. I can never prove that Han is something that I share with a lot of people. I think I also grapple with like, do I get to claim that as a Korean American? Do I get to claim that as a queer person, as a non-binary person? But ultimately, like whatever helps put gas in your tank for surviving, I'm like, yes, yes to all of that. But I think it's fascinating how it's such a contested word.
It's so interesting, right? Yeah, because there's like this implication of like suffering being requisite, right? But then there's also like a resiliency too, and which then gets even more complicated by the idea of like, oh, this is imposed by fucking Japanese, sorry, excuse me, colonizers. Like, yeah, I didn't know that part of it. That makes it messy.
Makes it messy. What do you feel about that word? Do you have feelings about that word?
Yeah, I think I'm just like learning about it. I think your book, and then I feel like there's like an Instagram account that's like called Han, and it's like political, like Korean moments of like Korean political history. So it's something that I'm very newly familiar with, but in connection with like kind of your first question, I think part of writing the book there, you kind of, or for me, I like went through the stages of grief, right? It starts with like rage. And I think a lot of the poems came from this place of just absolute like rage and suffering, and then like through revision it kind of gets to a place of like acceptance and healing, and that sounds similar to like kind of what you're describing around Han, and I think as someone who gets perceived as Korean but very much like doesn't have like any kind of Korean connection to Korean culture or identity in my family, there is this moment of like empowerment, I think, to be like, oh, I can claim that. That's me too. And that feels special. Like,
yeah, definitely. I think because there's also like not a lot about Korean culture that I relate with, you know? So that there is this like one thing that I can really relate to is feels really good. Okay, my turn. So I love what you're saying about how the book follows the process of rage, or of grief, like by starting with rage. Do you feel like your relationships with your different families and adults in your life, or grown-ups in your life, change in writing this book? And if so, how? And are you excited about that change, or like where are you at?
I have a similar question for you, because I was going to ask, like, your work is so deeply personal, and I was so curious about like like how, if and how you've shared it with the people that appear in your poems, because I think that's something that I'm like kind of still navigating. I think for me, in my own understanding of those relationships, I've grown a lot in being able to like reckon with and forgive, or or not, it's also like to better like parse through my memory and make sense of who I was even as this kind of vulnerable infant up and through my childhood and adolescence, and to really like make sense of how that's impacted who I am today. So I think from where I stand, I feel like I have a lot more comfort and closure, though it's still something that I think like I haven't necessarily had those vulnerable conversations with the adults that were a part of that.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't know how much of this book I would be able to write if I thought that my mom could understand all the And I'm like in this point right now, I'm considering translating it into Korean.
Oh wow.
And I love that idea because, the LGBTQ plus culture in Korea is like so underground. And I would love to add to, the literature about queerness and Korean identity. But then I'm like, but then my mom will actually understand all of them. And I don't know I don't know what it's going to take for me to be ready for that, because I think it's so important to tell the truth, because I do think it helps in child violence. I do think it provides this moment where we get to very intentionally choose what we want to carry forward and what we want to leave behind. But my mom didn't agree to these poems, right? It's not like I sent them all to her. We're like, hey, Mom, are you cool with this going out in the world and your friends reading it and your relatives reading it? But I found that I've had to like really believe in the point of the book, or the point of writing these stories, or I think I would have just gotten really derailed by worrying about what her reaction is. And, I think it's also a question of like, how do you paint someone in the fullness of who they are? Like, how do you be honest about both their homophobia and also their willingness to change? Like the ways that there was, the challenges brought on by being a single mother, and all the ways that they try. And I think I try to do that. But it's hard to know. I think I wanted to write the book and be like, cool, I've forgiven everyone I need to forgive. I'm done. Like, check, good to go. But obviously it's not like that. Which leads me to my next question for you. I love this line in your poem that says, the difference a word makes in the forest over longing. I just think that's so absurdly beautiful. And this could relate to, all the different parental figures you have in your life, but did the book like instigate any changes in your desires? Like, did it make your desires stronger? Did it placate any of your desires?
It's an interesting question. I think, so when I was writing the bulk of the book, I was simultaneously like beginning a search for my biological family, which was kind of just happening in the background. And I think, that's still something that interests me. However, I still I feel like I have come to a place where I don't need it, right? Like, I feel like it's given me some sense, like I said, I think like of healing and solace, to be like, these are all the things that led to where I'm at now. And also I think there's flexibility in how that changed, like the idea of the word cleave, right? How like to cut and to cling, and like based on context, we can apply it in different ways. And maybe like from day to day that might change. But I think overall, especially in my mid to late 20s, I think there was a very strong longing for Korea, or for Korean family, or just like, history and ancestry that I hadn't felt for most of my before that. And now I think I feel like I've come to terms with the fact that was something that I missed. And now it's like, okay, well now how can I feel myself? instead of, and so I'm again beyond the rage of like, oh, this is stolen from me, and moving into the place of like, okay, well, what do I do with this now, and how can I create space for this now? I love your idea of translation, because I've been thinking about that too. Again, like adoptees, South Korea was one of the largest exporters of children in the 80s and 90s, and I think like the adoptee perspective is, as far as I know, pretty absent from Korean mainstream culture. And I think like, wouldn't it be cool to do like all these like marginalized Korean American perspective and like translate them and be like, okay, like create an anthology?
I love that.
Well, yeah. That would be so cool.
That would be awesome. If you guys do that, you should contact us and we'll host you again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's really interesting that so many of your questions have to do with how has the poetry that you've written created impact in your lives outside of poetry. I thought that was a really interesting discussion. But now, as it's getting towards 7 o'clock, I was wondering if you guys had any recommendations you would like to share of what some of your favorite poetry books are, or what you're reading now. Tiana, what are some of your favorites?
Yeah, let me see. So, 2 books by other fellow Korean American adoptee poets that I really love are Arabilis by Leah Silvius, and Hour of the Ox by Marcy Calabretta Cancio-Bello. They're both very different, but like such just like beautiful work in terms of also just like diverse voices of the adoptee experience. And 2 books that just came out one that just came out this month, and one that's coming out next month by 2 dear friends. Imagine Us the Swarm by Muriel Leung, which is just about like intergenerational kind of inheritances and trauma and kind of ultimately healing. And Last Days by Tamiko Bayer, which is a very like eco-poetic book, and it's also super beautiful, and I highly recommend it.
Anam, how about you?
That's a solid list. I love it. Yeah, I feel like I can't stop talking about this book. Yeah, they are a queer Asian British person, and I just find the work so beautiful. Highly recommend. Marwa Halal's Invasive Species is also incredible and brilliant. I don't have it with me, but Eugenia Lee's Blood Sparrows Barrows. I love how we're on this theme of like Asian American poets. I also highly recommend as well. There's not a lot of I posted something on Instagram today. I was like, dear teenage self, you will not read any Korean American authors until you're 20, which is so true. So I love how we are both sharing other Asian American authors, because representation really matters, right? And our voices often are not a part of the conversation. So yeah, thank you for the book Rex question.
Yeah, and people can get those from Read It Again or their favorite indie bookstore. There's links to them in the comments. And at the end of Anam's book are more book recommendations. So there's always lots of things out there to read next. And both of their beautiful books are available, and you should definitely read them. I just finished Cleave today, and you can see I've like written all in it, but it was very good. So thank you both for joining us. The next time you guys have a book coming out, you should will probably be in person by then, and you should definitely come by the store and have a live event. That would be amazing. So thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you in the store or eventually. Bye. Good night.